invite you to stand with me now as we read from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.' Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known." The gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. Please be seated.
Opening the presents. I'm most excited about Santa coming. I'm excited about being with my family and friends, spending time with my family, and celebrating Jesus' birthday. Celebrating Jesus' birthday, also opening up all the gifts. Everything. Going to Ohio.
You're going to Ohio?
Yeah, and opening my presents.
Being with my family.
Presents? The presents. Yeah.
Jesus.
Okay.
He's a guy who's invisible and you can't even see him. And he's always by you. He's the Son of God. Jesus is obviously the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of God, and he was born on Christmas. The King.
He's God's Son.
God's Son. Well, Jesus is the Messiah, and Christmas is when he was born, and he's the reason for Christmas.
No clue. Because it's just exciting. I think because, Jesus, gave us presents, and we get to give each other presents and stuff.
Because the wise men brought him gifts.
The people who came gave them presents. We gave them presents, maybe.
Because he gave us a gift that we could never return.
Because it shows love and that you love somebody.
Give. To give and get presents. Get presents. Give. I think give. Because Christmas isn't about getting or bragging. It's about giving in Jesus. Both.
To get presents.
Both.
Give. Because, you see how happy they are when they got their gift?
Well, I don't know. It just depends. Sometimes it's fun to see the people with their faces light up when you give them that thing. But it's pretty fun to get presents. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I do believe in Jesus. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
At Christmas. Awesome, right? Our 3 o'clock service, which we had earlier today, is usually mostly families with young children. And there is a holy chaos that happens in here at 3 o'clock that y'all have to experience at some point. It is all kinds of stuff going on. We've got babies, we've got toddlers, we've got all kinds of things happening. And it's really exciting. And I especially love Christmas Eve at church because you're seeing kids who are barely holding it together. You know, their faces are taut. They know they're supposed to be good for one more hour. And they just can't wait until Christmas morning. Do you remember being like that? I remember being like that when I was a kid. I was the one ready to make the assault at 0400, you know, ready to dive into my parents' room and make it happen, you know, get this thing going. I was a kid who was afraid of the dark, and yet I would be the one who would low crawl out into the living room in the middle of the night to check out the presents that might be under the tree, knowing that it was a stealthy mission to accomplish. I used to love opening the presents on Christmas morning and playing with all the stuff and the decorations and all of that. And after we opened presents at home, we would go to my grandparents' house where my grandpa had set up his train set. And this was an old school train set. My grandpa worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad for more than 40 years. So he knew trains, and he loved to set up this train set, which was an old electric set that had a transformer on it, that when you threw the switch, sparks came out. I mean, it was, and all the snow on the scene was cotton, so, and the tree was dry pine, so how the house never burned down, I have no idea, but I love to watch those trains just go around in circles. And there was one little place where them that went by the station, the little guy would come down the stairs and he'd go back up really fast, and I loved that. I loved the whole thing. And my grandparents would keep our presents in 3 big plastic garbage bags. Each kid got a big plastic garbage bag, and you would go through them, and they were set up in a particular order, so you'd go through them like an archaeological expedition. So on the top layer was socks and underwear, quickly discarded. Then there was the dress clothes that we had tried on at Sears, but had forgotten about completely, and yet there they were, and we threw those aside too. And then there was some candy and homemade goodies. My grandma always made pizzelles. Anybody know pizzelles? Oh, yes. Oh, somebody else. Yes. She would make them by the gross. I mean, like massive quantities. And then at the bottom was the stuff you couldn't wait to see. That were the toys that you so desperately wanted and had scoured the Sears wish book for, you know, which is a very old sentence, to scour the wish book. You know, the wish book was like the Bible. It had an Old Testament and a New Testament. The Old Testament was the clothes and appliances. The New Testament was the toys. So that was good news. And so you'd look through the wish book and you'd get the stuff you wanted. You couldn't wait to get it. And then 2 days later, you had forgotten about it. But that was Christmas. It was exciting. I couldn't wait for it. It seemed like it would never come. Now, as an adult, it seems like it happens every 3 days. Especially for those of us who work in the church, right? We're like always getting ready for Christmas. Either getting over Christmas or getting ready for Christmas. It's always coming. As an adult, it loses some of the excitement. You know, so for example, we've got presents under the tree at our house, but Jennifer and I ordered them together on Amazon, and they came to the house, and she wrapped them up and stuck them under the tree, and we're going to open them in the morning like, wow, surprise, here's the book you've been waiting to read. And they're books now for us. That's the kind of stuff that we do. No more toys. We have adult children now. Our daughter Hannah's living in France this year, so this is the first year it won't be all 4 of us together. And we're kind of sad about that, but I warm my heart with memories of our kids being little like that, and you kind of live vicariously through them at that point. And there was one story of one Christmas when Hannah was a toddler that I always think of this time of year, and especially when I read this text from John chapter 1 about the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us. When she was little, very little, she loved to get her toys out and to construct these dramas with them. And she was a film major in college, so she's still doing that, except toys, she's using people and making these stories. And she loved to do that. And anything in the house could be used for these stories. And we had a nativity set, we actually still have it, that looks like this. It was a wooden nativity set. We got it when we were first married. And the pieces were pretty big and chunky, too big for a toddler to stick in his or her mouth. And so that was the one thing that we kept under the tree. And interestingly, it went undisturbed when she was a toddler. She didn't really mess with it at all. It was always there. Everything else in the house was fair game, but the nativity set, not so much. Until one day when I noticed that Mary and Joseph and the shepherds and the wise men and the animals were all staring at the manger, except there weren't anybody in it. Jesus was gone. And we looked high and low for him. We scoured the living room. We looked under the furniture. We looked between the couch cushions. We looked in the toy box. We looked inside the VCR, which is also a very old sentence. You know, we looked inside there because she called that the cave, and things wound up in there occasionally, and you'd have to go in with stuff like playing Operation, to pull it out, to get it out of there. Couldn't find it. Couldn't find baby Jesus. All day until evening came, and Jennifer was putting Hannah to bed upstairs, and I was cleaning up the toys in the living room. What I noticed in the corner was Hannah's little Fisher-Price school bus. Remember the Fisher-Price school bus with all the little wee people, all the smiling wee people, the smiling construction worker and the smiling policeman and the smiling dog and the smiling bus driver. And when I picked up the bus to put it away, I noticed that inside the bus was the smiling baby Jesus. And I thought to myself, I'm seminary trained. I've taken multiple courses on Christology and eschatology and the incarnation of Jesus and biblical studies and all of that. I'd studied this passage from John 1 backwards and forwards in Greek. I didn't really understand it, but I still studied it in Greek. And as I looked at it, I thought I had it figured out, but my baby daughter had it locked. She understood what John 1, what he was talking about. When the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, he came to be with us on the bus, to be one of us, so that we could be like him. It was a powerful image for me that I'll never forget, and it reminds me so much of how important it is to see things through the eyes of children. We miss that, I think, as adults. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, says John, and Christmas is the story of how the God of the universe stepped into human history and did it in person. He was God with a human face, the one who reveals to us who God is and what God is like. It was such a radical thing for God to do that no one expected it then or now, unless they become like children. Adults don't seem to understand it, or at least it needs some explaining. In fact, some of the earliest heresies in the Christian church had to do with Jesus' humanity and divinity. And one of them was called Docetism, which suggested that Jesus only appeared to be human, that he really wasn't all that. He wasn't fully human like us, only seemed to be. They tried to explain away the idea that God would stoop so low as to have human flesh. And many people still treat Jesus this way, as if he should remain under glass or on a high shelf where he won't get broken or ruined by reality. I've discovered over the years of my ministry that it's extremely difficult to ruin a child's Christmas, but it's really easy to ruin an adult's Christmas. Very easy. My first Christmas sermon ever that I preached in my first appointment. I preached the sermon. I went to the door afterward, and as people were filing out, shaking hands, Merry Christmas, all of the stuff that we do, until one of our members came up and he was scowling. And I stuck out my hand and I said, Merry Christmas. And he pulled his hand back and he said, you ruined my Christmas. And I said, pray tell, how did I do so? He said, I didn't say that, but you know what I mean. I thought that. He said, we didn't sing the first Noel as the second hymn. And we always sing the first Noel as the second hymn. And if we don't do that, it's not Christmas. You ruin my Christmas. Okay. Turns out that would be a pattern for me over the years, ruining people's Christmas. My congregation will tell you that I do it every year, right? I mean, normally the Advent candles are peace, love, joy, and hope. This year we used the medieval candle liturgy. So the candles were judgment, death, heaven, and hell. That's what we did. Christmas, Advent, ruined. One year I told a story in the middle of the sermon about a live nativity scene where they had a real baby as baby Jesus. Trey and Rowan are down here in front. Live baby as baby Jesus. And the sanctuary was packed like this, and there was stuffy in there, and it was a little close. And in the middle of the service, while things were going on, baby Jesus did what babies do and filled his diaper to overflowing. And the smell began to waft through the congregation. And you could see noses wrinkling and all that kind of stuff happening. Every parent's familiar with this particular thing that happens at always the least opportune time. And the pastor, though, didn't miss a beat. He stood up and said, now you know what it meant for God to become human. That there was mess in the message. That there is an odor, not an aura. And that God becoming human, like us, was messy business. Now, I thought this was the greatest illustration of the incarnation that I could have possibly come up with. I thought it was fantastic. But not everyone did. The day after Christmas, a couple storms into my office, furious. You ruined our Christmas. Ruined it. Pray tell, how did I do so? Because you told that disgusting story on Christmas Eve about a baby having an accident. And that's baby Jesus. That's not in the Gospels. These accidents, that's not in there. You can't talk about that. It's disgusting. You sicken us. We talked about it all Christmas Day. And I thought, man, that must have been a bummer of a Christmas day. They were furious. So we're leaving the church. And they stormed out of my office. Well, after something like that happens, you got to kind of get yourself together. And I thought things had gone pretty well, but apparently not. So I decided to take myself out to lunch. And I went to my favorite Chinese restaurant. And I sat down at the restaurant and I started to eat my lunch. And in walks this couple who had just left my office. And they look at me, and they turn their noses, and they walk to the other end of the restaurant, and they sit down. And I had a thought, and it took every ounce of my sanctification not to act on it. And the thought was, what would happen if I sent them a poo-poo platter? What would have happened had I done so? I didn't do it. But every day, every Christmas, wish I had. But that's docetism, right? Thinking that Jesus could be human like us, to have something like that happen, that's way out of bounds. After all, God could not possibly allow himself to deal with things like human bodily functions or to do things that a normal human being would do. He must be kept pure, be kept high on a shelf, contained within a hardened order of worship on Christmas Eve, or confined to the manger scene. That's a very adult way of thinking, however. Many of the people of Jesus' day thought the same way. The idea that God could become human was out of bounds. So when Jesus, God in the flesh, came, they rejected him. As John says, he was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. See, their God belonged in heaven, or belonged confined within the walls of a temple. That God could become a baby, born under questionable circumstances in a barn to a poor family, living in Nazareth, born in Bethlehem, was out of bounds. That God could become a construction worker who could perform miracles, who had a knack for teaching, who would challenge the assumptions of religious authorities, that was too much of a stretch. That God would come in person and die the most shameful death possible on a Roman cross, and then 3 days later walk out of the tomb alive, that was the last straw. They rejected such a vision as blasphemy. To believe that would ruin everything. But lest we be too hard on them, we also must recognize that people still reject Jesus today in much the same way. Many people today, tonight, tomorrow, will celebrate his birth but have no knowledge of him, really. They're comfortable with Jesus so long as he stays in a manger, so long as he only comes out once or twice a year and doesn't interfere with their worldview or challenge their ideas or their identity. It's okay to come and sing about him once in a while, but the rest of the time, well, we've got really adult things to do. But the Gospels won't allow us to keep Jesus so constrained. That's why we read them when we gather here. They reveal the story of a people who saw what God had done, saw who God was in Jesus Christ, and with childlike faith, they believed it and lived it. They believed it because they received him, because they followed him, because they listened to him, because they watched what he did and listened to what he said, and followed him as he went to a cross, and then saw him alive after he had been crucified. And they said, it's true. They allowed him to invade their world, to challenge their ideas, to poke around in their lives, to show them that they were missing the life that could be theirs, the life that God had intended for them from the very beginning, the life we read about in Genesis, life lived in the image of God. He showed them that God wasn't a distant deity sitting on a cloud somewhere, but one that loved them enough to suffer on their behalf, to take their sin upon himself, to set them free to live as people created in God's image. He was and is God with us. The disciples who first encountered Jesus believe it. Over the next several weeks leading up to Easter, we're going to be going through the Gospel of John here, and we're calling it Conversations with Jesus, because this is an opportunity for us to see how an encounter with Jesus changed people's lives and can change our lives still today. They believed that this same God, in the person of Jesus, invited them to put aside their adult lenses and instead to see with the eyes of children. Adults see the world through the lenses of striving and thriving, right? We strive after things. We strive after better job, better paycheck. We strive after a nicer house. We strive after a secure lifestyle. We believe all of these are the key to thriving. But you notice that kids don't think about any of that stuff. What do they think about? Receiving and believing. They have no filter. They see things as they are. They see no difference between the sacred and the secular. They believe all things are possible. They love surprises. I don't know, as an adult now, the only time I love a surprise is on Christmas or my birthday. Otherwise, it's kind of scary, right? They're playful and they envision a God who plays with them, a God who will get on the bus with smiling people. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. Power to become children. That sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? Because children are supposed to be powerless. But Jesus came as a child to make us into God's children. Children born not by blood or by the will of other humans, but children born of God. Children who have the imaginative faith to see what others cannot see. Children who are not embarrassed to have faith. It's really hard to embarrass a toddler. Have you noticed this? They are not easily embarrassed. Adults are. Faith moves us beyond it. To be children means that we're willing to see a man named Jesus and know that he is God and reveals what God is really like. And that's the question for Christmas Eve. Who is Jesus to you? Is he a figure in a manger? An abstraction? A wise teacher? A pain in the neck? A threat? Or is he God? It's the ultimate question for Christmas. What will you do with Jesus? Maybe you have a ready adult answer, a philosophical answer, a theological answer, a seminary answer. Maybe it's an opinion. Maybe you haven't thought about it. But see, Jesus didn't come to convince those of us who see ourselves as adults and have the world figured out. Instead, he came to those who would receive him like a little child. He came to help people to have a new birth and to help them find the life that they were meant to live. As Peter puts it in the New Testament lesson, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Christ from the dead and into an inheritance that can never perish or spoil or fade. Though you have not seen him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy, for you are receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Do you experience an inexpressible joy? Children do. They will be joyous tonight and joyous in the morning. Are we as joyous when we encounter the risen Christ every single day? That's the question. Adults say seeing is believing. Children start with belief, and then they see. Those born anew to a living hope become God's children, and they are able to see truth. If you want to meet that Jesus tonight, I hope you will receive his invitation to become like little children. To receive him and believe in him, because when you do, you'll receive that power, that authority, that right to become children, to receive the inheritance of grace that God wants to lavish upon us, the abundant life that Jesus offers to us, life that is free from the slavery of sin, life that is free from the fear of death, life that is free to live as God intended us to live from the very beginning. When you become a child of God, you will begin to live fully in the present, knowing that your past is forgiven and your future secure. Truly, I tell you, Jesus said, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Reminded of one more story, and that is a story about a nighttime. Always a tough time for kids. The child alone in bed, after mom and dad put him to sleep. And after they leave, 5 minutes later, he cries out, I'm afraid. Somebody come. Mom. Mom comes into the room. Says, what's wrong? I'm afraid. It's dark. And mom says, don't be afraid. God is with you. She tucks him back in and leaves the room. 10 minutes later, you know what this is like. Mom, I'm afraid. Okay, remember, I told you, God is with you. Settle down, go to sleep. 5 minutes later, Mom, remember, God is with you. And the child looked at his mom and said, but I want a God with skin on. Friends, tonight, we gather to remember and to celebrate the fact that we have a God who puts skin on. He became one of us so that we might become like him. He became one of us so that we might be free, to be people he made us to be. Tonight, I hope that as you go home and as you prepare, that you'll remember the child who has come to make us into his children. May we all become excited, uncontainable, inexpressibly joyful, because we have received the greatest gift that we could ever receive. Unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. He has come for us. Let us pray. Lord, tonight we receive you. We hear the cooing of little babies, and we're reminded so powerfully of what you did for us, that you stepped out of glory and brought glory to humanity, that you became one of us so that we might become like you, whole, pure, and made new. Lord, work in us. For those tonight who are seeking you, I pray that you would make yourself known. Send your Spirit and grant us the childlike faith to see real truth and to receive and believe. In the name of the Christ who has come, we pray. Amen.